Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we're going to be talking about Rosie Riveters, not the ones that you may have in mind from World War II, but this program is a STEM program for girls aged 4 to 14. Joining me is the founder and executive director, Brittany Greer. Thank you so much for being here, Brittany.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm intrigued by the name. I'm intrigued by the program. Everyone I've spoken to is like, what a great idea. Tell me a little bit about how you came to develop the program and why you called it Rosie Riveters.
Yeah, so my background before starting the organization is I worked in the energy industry. And so I worked with them on digital communications, but I had the great benefit of working on a project of how we engaged more women in nuclear. And so I went all over the world. I talked to people from many different backgrounds and was kind of fully immersed in this, what's called the STEM pipeline. So the path women follow to entering careers in STEM. And what I noticed significantly was that at the first drop-off point, so the big point that we lose a lot of girls in this space is middle school. There's a ton of programming. There's always room for more programming. I highly recommend it. But there's tons of programming from middle school onward that's looking at kind of filling these gaps in the timeline space. But there wasn't much before that point. And so when I was looking at it, I was going, well, what are the problems that are facing girls and women kind of entering this space? And a lot of it comes to the development of kind of 21st century skills, if you will. So those soft skills, as we sometimes call them. Critical thinking, problem solving, general overcoming of stereotypes within the space. And by the time you're 7, right, girls are already losing confidence in the space. They're already identifying things as boy things or girl things. So I kind of looked at it and said, well, why aren't we getting involved from the first time that they can actually sit in a classroom environment, the first time that they're in an institution, right, where they're kind of learning these things, and start to hardwire a different mindset. So to hardwire the ability that building confidence, critical thinking skills, and your general relationship to science, technology, engineering, and math. And so I was reading the book, Rosie Revere Engineer, to my daughter. I grew up loving Rosie the Riveter. I had her poster on my wall when I was a kid.
Very iconic.
Yeah, absolutely. Surprisingly, a lot of the generation today don't know who she was. So it's a great space to have that conversation. But very much inspired by this we can do it spirit, right? And so the same kind of gumption that these women had during the period of World War II, when they walked into these fields. They had no background in them. They did these jobs, they did them beautifully, and they did them as kind of a girl-powered group, if you will. So we're trying to inspire that same we can do it spirit in this generation, and do it from an early age. So by the time that they get to 7, we've had the conversations that what does it mean to be a girl in STEM, and why does it matter that we participate in these fields, and how are we, through our programming, developing those 21st century skills so that when that middle school drop-off point happens and girls are self-selecting into their extracurricular activities, more girls are selecting to go into those amazing STEM programs that are available. And with more girls participating there and armed with the tools they need to navigate that wider pipeline, we will have more women engaged in these fields in the long term.
So when did you start this program?
Yeah.
And how do you reach you've got a waiting list actually for your program.
Yeah.
How did you found this? How are you managing to scale this?
Yeah, so we founded the organization in 2015, offered our first programs in 2016. And essentially, my big priority with programming is saying, how do we reach populations effectively? Meaning not only are they available, but are they accessible? So we, for our first set of programming, went out and developed a relationship with Arlington County Public Libraries. Because from my perspective, libraries were kind of shifting a little bit, right? So they were developing these maker spaces. They were looking as a space where they could bring more people into the library. And if you've ever been into most public libraries, there's a bunch of little kids, and there's a bunch of older people. And the middle group isn't really participating in that space, but it's a plethora of resource, right? So from programming to computer access to help with research to just exposure to books. And so I reached out to the libraries and said, hey, we'd like to deliver these programs. We'd like to form a partnership with you. You're already in the community, particularly in Arlington, most are metro accessible. And so we went to launch our first programs. In terms of how we captured the student population, we did backpack drops. So our programs are completely free of charge to our participants. So we weren't asking for a fee. So the beauty of Arlington County Schools is that if you want to then speak to that population, you can put a flyer in their backpack.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so for our first program, that's what we did. And essentially, since then, we've served 587 girls to date. As you mentioned, we have 270 kids on our wait list.
Wow.
And since that initial backpack drop, that's completely been spread by word of mouth. So that's from parents who've come to our program and said, you got to sign your kid up for this program. And so that kind of continuing to happen and being able to have these amazing experiences that we have with the girls has kind of brought out this incredible demand for STEM programming for this younger age group, and programming that is continually interactive and can really start to shift kind of girls' relationships to science, technology, engineering, and math.
Well, I think it's important because things are gendered so early, pink and blue. I don't know how we came to this, because it seems to me when I was growing up, I wore my brother's hand-me-down clothes and everybody else did, and it was fine, right? We just didn't have this sort of pink-blue thing.
Yep.
But so when people ask you why only for girls, why not have it for both boys and girls? What is your response to why just girls?
Yeah, so we always say our mission as an organization is the engagement of girls and women in STEM, right? The proportion of women engaging in these fields is significantly underrepresented, right, across the board. Some fields vary a little bit, but overall, women are particularly underrepresented in the space. And if you've ever walked in for most environments into an advanced physics class or an advanced calculus class, they tend to be male dominated. And there is a stigma that comes to walking in and being the only girl in the room, right? And having to, in addition to all of the other layers that are helping you to enter a STEM field, you have to overcome that as well. So there's a big shift when the majority of girls and people in the room are female. So we say we don't completely exclude boys from programming, but we always have 80% female. Now, usually our population is 100% female. But when we do have boys participate in the space, the ability to be that only person in the room is significant. And it's something that you keep with you. And so when you walk into your calculus class, and there is like one or two girls in the room, and hopefully that shifts by the time that these kids enter calculus, you're not sitting on the sideline and forgetting about that person because you know what that experience has been like. And that's the feedback we get a lot is, the girls are more inclined to participate in that space. And when they've had a chance to participate in that space, they translate that back into their classroom. And so into the classrooms where they might not be the majority, or they might just be in equal representation. The skills we're building in our classroom environment by being in that all-girls space carry on kind of beyond it. And
I think they've proven that actually with all-female institutions like women's universities, Wellesley and Mount Holyoke. There's a reason. It's because women excel when all of the leadership opportunities is going to be someone in that gender group.
Completely.
And it's not the same when it's mixed gender groups. But there's a difference. So you work with 4-year-olds and you work with 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
Like 10 years is a world of difference.
Yeah.
So how do you design?
Yeah. So they're not all in the same room. We're very conscious that 4 and 14-year-olds are different. But we're subset into technically 4 age groups. So our preschoolers, so our 4 and 5-year-olds who've never been in kindergarten are their own group. And then we have kindergarten through 1st grade, 2nd through 5th, and 6th through 8th. And so the spread within those kind of smaller groups works really well because the older kids can meet with the younger kids, but there's not too much of a gap. They can also do the same project. And so they're subset into that. But when you enter with us at pre-K, the goal line is not for you to just come to a pre-K program. It's for you to come to a pre-K program and then come to a kindergarten through 1st, and then come through a 2nd through 5th, and then come through a 6th through 8th. And to do that once a year with us at least. So that you can have this continued engagement. And you're also building a peer group that has a similar interest to you.
It's like a cohort. You've got a cohort.
Exactly, which is so. And the beauty of when we're in the library, for instance, or in the community centers where we also work, is that they might not be kids from your school. It's not a problem if they are, and we do work across schools as well, and there's a powerful relationship to that. But so it means that if your peer group at school isn't doing this, you still have a group that is, and you still have an access point, which when you get to middle school becomes much more significant, right? If your peer group isn't self-identifying within this space, your ability to walk away from it becomes much higher. Whereas if you have a group of friends or a group of peers who you interact with and you've built a relationship with, you're going to continue to go into that space because you feel supported and you feel like your network is there.
So how long do the programs run?
So kindergarten, anything below first grade is an hour in terms of programming.
Okay.
And then second through fifth is 2. And then the program in terms of how many times we're engaging over a period varies based on community need. So in Arlington, we run 12 session programs. So it's one session a month for 4 months for each age group. In a lot of our after school settings, there's 6 to 8 weeks. And then in our community center settings, they are 5 weeks of a summer intensive, so once a week every week for the summer, and then once a month for an entire calendar of school year. And the reason why there's such variation there is because community needs vary. Community access varies. So within the community center where we work, there's a USAID food program, right? So there's dinner served every night after school.
Oh, that makes a difference.
Yeah, and there's a ton of other, the kids are coming in from school, they have makeup tests, they have different things. So serving them once a month in a school year works, means that we can actually service them without taking away from the other services that they're being able to be provided with. And then in the summer, they're there in a summer space, so we can come once a week, every week for 5 weeks and build a relationship with that group we're going to work out for the entire year. In Arlington, where we're working in the libraries, the community need is different there, right? So we're metro accessible. Saturdays tend to work best, particularly in terms of release time from school. And a lot of elementary schools don't get out until like 4:30.
Right, later in the afternoon.
So for a kindergartner, they're a little tired at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So by getting to an off-site location, you're not starting a program until at least 4:30, 5 o'clock. And then if you're running a 2-hour program or a 1-hour program, you're into that 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock space. So we found that Saturdays work best for that community in terms of access. So the goal line is that we have these separate models. All of these models work, and then based on the community need, the individual models can be applied so that the community has not only has it available, but has it accessible to them.
Which is great because you're constantly taking the feedback, tweaking it, and making sure that it's not just age appropriate, but community appropriate.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you've got all these different locations where you can actually deliver this curriculum and meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk more about that because, I think our viewers are interested in, like, how do we get this where we are? And scaling is something every nonprofit struggles with,
Yeah.
and you're no different. You have got to balance growing your program with having adequate resources and needs. So
Yeah.
when we come back from this break, we are going to be talking with Brittany Greer about her program, Rosie Riveters, which is a STEM program for girls age 4 to 14.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination.
Honey, have you seen my cell phone?
But don't just imagine.
My park came to life?
Ooh, a plot twist.
Use STEM to build, create,
She did it.
and change the world.
Who's with me?
I'm more of a 2 feet on the ground kind of guy.
Oh, it's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
My twin brother Jacob has an autism spectrum disorder. I remember one moment after being at school all day. I remember him getting into the car just bawling and saying, "Mom, I have no friends. Why don't I have any friends?" It broke my heart. That was the moment when I realized that I needed to do something about this. I needed to make a difference in his life. And I knew that if I could help him find a friend, I could help teach other people that including people with differences is the right thing to do. That was the inspiration behind my nonprofit, Score a Friend. Educating people to include people with differences is so important because when Jacob's included, he feels like he can succeed in life and he feels like he actually has a purpose.
Staring contest!
You still got it.
I know.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, And today I'm talking with Brittany Greer. She is the Executive Director and founder of Rosie Riveters, a STEM program for girls aged 4 to 14. I am fascinated by how, as a small organization that's basically 3 years old, you manage so many programs in so many locations for different age groups, and the materials required in order to do this kinds of hands-on teaching.
Yeah, so it's a lot, certainly. We have been resourced in the fact that we've really been able to hone in our curriculum and our content. And so when we're going into new spaces, we have this content that's been there. And so we've kind of been through the prep process before. Volunteers are always amazing. Again, we're always looking to kind of expand resource so that we can hire somebody who can do program prep, particularly because our programs are heavy in terms of most materials and kind of the preparation that goes into them. Because what we really are focusing on is the innovative programming that we have available. So most programs, you kind of go in, you get to experience science, and you walk away. Right. Whereas our programs are very much focused on kind of three components, which is a hands-on and interactive lesson, right? So say we're talking about building art bots, for instance. To know how to build art bots, you have to understand circuits. Right. So we'll do a hands-on interactive lesson where the kids are literally standing in a circle. They all have stress balls in their hands that are electrons, and they're repelling those electrons around a circle. They're opening the circuit up, they're closing the circuit. We're talking about how the circuit has to be closed for the electrons to move. And that lasts about 20 to 30 minutes. And then we go into our project build. And that's where the materials come into play. Because unlike a lot of other projects, we don't have a list of instructions, right? We're not standing up and saying, put A to B and put the red wire to the red wire. They're given a table of materials and a completed operational example, right? So what I mean by operational, meaning it turns on, it moves for the art bot, and it's balanced. Okay. And then they have a table of materials that include both materials in that project and materials that aren't in the example. And then they build, right? So I always say the first two things I hear at the beginning of a program are, this is hard, and my favorite one is, it's not fair. Because they've never been in this environment. They've never been in an environment where somebody said, you may have never done this before, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you can't figure it out. Which is the whole kind of building of those 21st century skills is built into our project model, right? So having to critically think, to say, okay, I might know how to do this, but there's a completed example, and it has these materials in it, and there's these materials on the table, and I can say, hey, the battery pack is attached there, maybe I should attach the battery pack. And we work with them to develop that. So when the kid is just frozen and doesn't know where to go with that, the mentoring component of our programs, which is we actively bring volunteers in this space, and most people think, oh, you probably need less volunteers because you're not helping them, physically do the project. But actually, it's a much more one-on-one experience because it's coaching effectively. Right. So you're going over and saying, hey, what can you tell me 2 things you see in the example? Well, I see a cup and I see a battery pack if you're building art bots. And you'll go, well, do you see those materials on the table? Yeah. Do you think you can put them together? Yeah. And that's step 1. It's coaching. It's coaching. And that's a skill set that is so empowering, right? Because if you know that just because you've never done something before, or just because you don't have a expert knowledge base on it, particularly as a female, doesn't mean that you're not capable of knocking it out of the park, figuring it out, moving forward with it, is a huge skill set to move forward with, because it means that you're going to be more inclined to try stuff you haven't tried before and feel comfortable out of your comfort zone. And navigate kind of all of the other obstacles that might come into your way as you continue down this STEM path. And that requires a lot of materials, right? And it requires a lot of preparation of materials, because if I'm building art bots with a 2nd grader and they're gonna wire and do circuits and things they haven't done before, some of that material needs to be prepped ahead of time in order for them to be successful, right? I can't say to kindergartners, you have to cut the box with an X-Acto knife. That's not going to work. Let's not do that. But I can give them a pre-cut box and then let them add the things that they need to add to it and still have the completed work. And so that's labor intensive, and it's something that we actively work from as we scale out, because we have amazing teachers. We have the benefit of the fact that we actively fundraise to pay our teachers. Right. But a lot of teachers have come from an entire day at school, and they've been lesson planning. Or even if we're working with grad students who are in track for education, or even in STEM fields, they again are busy and they're doing a lot of things.
So they don't want to do the actual prep of materials. Like
Exactly.
that's kind of a waste of their time.
Yeah, or material sourcing, any of those things.
Right.
What we need them to do is go in, do what they do well. And then being able to navigate that coaching space and those volunteers in that space so that the girls can have the most rewarding experience that they could possibly have imagined. And so we work to prep that. Currently, a lot of that is done by me.
So perhaps we can talk about volunteer opportunities.
Yeah,
and when people say,
absolutely.
well, how can I get involved in the program? And you find this with a lot of nonprofits. People are like, well, I want to support this, but I'm not sure what I could possibly do. But it sounds like even people who don't necessarily want to be working with the children as coaches,
Yeah.
if you've got time, you could use their help in doing material prep and putting it together
Yeah.
so that these materials are dispatched to each program in each location.
Completely. Like if you like crafts, we're
Yeah.
a great space for you to come to, right? If you like to organize, we have great opportunities. So from material prep to material kind of organization so that a teacher can open up a packet and be able to deliver curriculum and not have to not know where pieces are. That's an amazing resource that greatly benefits us as an organization. If you're interested in teaching with us, right? So we train our teachers in our space because our environment's a little different, right? It's different to go from an environment where you have 45 minutes to get through a lesson and you don't have the luxury of 2 hours to let them independently build. So I always say it's not training, it's immersion in a new space so
Right.
that you can get comfortable within that space. Which sometimes it's exciting to be there, but it's just out of your comfort zone. So we're actively always looking for teachers to get involved with us, both from a faculty position and also from just a volunteer position, if that's something within your space and your remit. Additionally, we're always looking for those individuals with skills that even go beyond the classroom. We're always looking for classroom volunteers. We love to have our classroom volunteers, and it's an incredibly rewarding experience to be there. But additionally, we're looking at how we best capture data. We're working on our theory of change. We're working on how we best make sure that the vision of the long term of us increasing the representation of women in STEM fields, how our programs are continuing to do that and continuing to be effective. So knowledge in terms of analytics and space from that perspective is, especially as a small organization, we have great opportunities for. Because we greatly value you when you come to us.
Right.
And so blending those types of expertise, if you have an expertise that you think would be applicable to us, call me. Because I'm happy to hear from you.
Right, and and you've got a website, rosieRiveters.org. You're on Facebook. You have a Twitter account.
We do.
All of these places. And I love your hashtag, confidence to try.
Thank you.
Confidence to try. When I hear you talking about coaching students through being frustrated, it reminds me I went to South by Southwest EDU 2 years ago. And there was a panelist of librarians talking about creating maker spaces in school libraries. Mm-hmm. And how this introduced this different element of letting kids be frustrated and letting them sit with the frustration.
Yep.
And then let them feel the sense of achievement, not because you told them how to do it,
Yep.
but because you sat there and helped them until they figured out how to do it. And you're building resilience.
Completely.
And most academic curriculum, the way it's set up right now, there is no space for that. Kids know they're being graded.
Yep.
And so makerspace and the curriculum you're discussing is not about getting a grade. Mm-hmm. It's about figuring it out.
Yeah, our program is literally designed that they are likely to fail initially. Doesn't mean that by the end of it they're not going to succeed in completing it, but in that build time that they're independently, the likelihood that they put a wire together incorrectly, or they need to re-secure kind of connections, or check a build is likely. And the projects are built that they're complicated, right? So that you have those kind of micro failures. And I say failures meaning just, people always say, they talk about kind of girls' resistance to failing. Failing doesn't necessarily mean you failed, that you got an F, right? For a girl, it might mean I'm used to getting A's and now I got a B and I feel like a failure. It's giving them the space to say, hey, those missteps are valuable because each time you do them, you learn from them, and that you can get through them. And having that resilience hardwired in from 4, 5, 6 means that when you get into high school and you get that B in calculus for the first time, you're not walking away and saying, I shouldn't be here because I got a B. You're going, This is the process in science, technology, engineering, and math. This is the process in life. If I want to get the A, how do I then reassess to get there? But it doesn't mean that I'm a failure by being within that space. And that resilience is part of it. Grit is important.
Yes.
But having the space and the time to develop that grit when kids are constantly scheduled or constantly resourced, or even if you're not going into another program, you're going home because your brother and sister need help with snack after school. All kids nowadays are so overscheduled completely, that the ability to develop that grit and that resilience comes less and less likely because you're in a classroom environment where you're just hitting the mark every single time.
Well, and when you talk about 2 hours for your older kids, you know, how often do kids have the opportunity to do anything for 2 hours?
Exactly.
Like, and most people who are innovative or who do projects understand it takes a long time. Mm-hmm. But that's not, we tell kids we want them to be creative and we want them to innovate, and then what we do does not align with what we tell them we want.
Completely. And we actively fight for that. So when we talk about ensuring that we maintain the quality of our programming, we go into a lot of spaces with a new partner and they go, hey, can you do it in an hour? And we go, no, like we can't do it in an hour. We can see how we can work most effectively with you. In the community center, for instance, that was let's do it once a month for a calendar year and build that relationship, and we can then accommodate all those other needs. But cutting the program up and taking away the quality doesn't serve a child as well if I'm just adapting based on how it best fits into a schedule.
Right,
exactly.
The constraints of we need it to be an hour.
Yeah, and you got to fight for that. You have to say, it has to be 2 hours and here's why. And let's make it work so that we can make those 2 hours available.
So the message we want to give to our viewers, I think, is that just like the program, adults need to not second guess whether or not they have something of value to offer.
Completely.
Because everybody has something of value to offer. It's a matter of figuring out what people are interested in doing and how it matches up with the needs or the locations or the programs you currently have. Absolutely. And so I would suggest that everybody go to your website, which is rosieriviters.com. Yep. rosieriviters.com, that's important, so that they can figure out what the opportunities are. And I applaud you for doing this and doing it for girls because, as you said, the data shows us girls are underrepresented. So in starting in preschool, we need to tell girls, yes, you can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Do it.
All right. And for you, those of you at home, please visit rosieriviters.com. Figure out what you have to offer this program, and this is what you need to know.